Hi out there, we are at WonderCon. I am Vinny Mancuso with Collider.com. I am joined by Chris Butler, writer-director of Missing Link, and we are joined also by Mr. Link.
That's right.
I'm obsessed with the detail that goes into these movies, and the end result of this is just this complex, gorgeous film. That so much went into it. So I'm curious what day one is like when you have this entire thing in front of you, and you're like, I need to make that happen at some point in the future.
I know it's almost a little terrifying, day one. But for me, day one is so far back that I can barely remember it, because all of this stuff starts with an idea that I sketched in a notebook maybe 15 or more years ago. So there isn't like really that strict day one. I've been used to these characters. I've been wanting to tell a story with these characters for a long time. The first day of pre-production, or the first day after you get a green light, that's something different, because then you think, oh, we've actually got to make this. Yeah. And that can be quite terrifying, especially when it's a project that's as ambitious as this one was.
It's interesting that you wrote the script too, and I'm wondering if there was ever a point where you're writing something and in the back of your head you're like, how am I going to do this?
No, I think the thought in the back of the head is, how is someone else going to do this? Yeah. And that's something at LAIKA that they've been very good in the sense that no one's ever tried to stop me from writing something. I mean, I try to write what I think is going to be an entertaining movie, an entertaining story. Occasionally, I'll think, ooh, I probably shouldn't be writing this. But I think one thing that's been proven by the studio since I've been there is that we find a solution for everything.
So where did the story come from? Where did this idea for the Sasquatch sort of journey come from?
So for me, it was, the best movie ever made in the history of the universe is Raiders of the Lost Ark.
True, very true.
No doubt.
That's an objective fact.
Yeah.
I believe it's been proven by science.
That's right. And I think I always had this kind of thought of, wouldn't it be great if we had like a stop motion Indiana Jones? And as a kid, I was also a big Sherlock Holmes fan. So I thought, okay, Indiana Jones meets Sherlock Holmes meets Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. That's kind of what the movie is. It's a buddy movie. It's this the world's first cryptozoologist, Sir Lionel Frost, voiced by Hugh Jackman, and his journey across the globe with this guy, voiced by Zach Galifianakis.
And there is the performances are great, and there's like a real human element to it. And I'm wondering, when you're down in the nitty gritty and you're figuring out moving the figures and you're figuring out the technicalities, how do you remember to, keep the humanity of it when you're moving these tiny piece by piece figures?
Yeah, it's a trick. I think it's probably the most important thing about directing an animated movie is the ability to step back, because everything we do is like this insane amount of detail obsession, and we have people whose job it is for 3 years to do one tiny aspect of one tiny thing and do it brilliantly. And I think as the director, you've got to be able to step back and say, what is this shot about? What is this story about? Who are these characters? Because in the end, what you want on the screen is a story that contains characters that an audience will find compelling. It doesn't matter how amazing they look. I mean, it's kind of cool. But you just want the audience to be lost in their story.
And I want to talk very specifically about one scene. I won't give too much away, but I'm kind of obsessed with this, how it was done. There's a moment on a boat where you sort of do an Inception thing.
Yeah.
How did you do that?
It's a good question. I remember when we were storyboarding that, and I was thinking, this is going to have to go. But that was important, because to me, it's like, why do you do animation? You do animation because you get to play in a stylized version of the world. And so if you have an action sequence in an animated movie, it should be bigger than real life. So for this this chase sequence on board a boat, and it's taking place in the middle of a storm, and the boat goes up the side of a wave, so the characters are running on the walls. And the original, because obviously all these things are physical sets, and they're huge. Like, one of those corridors is the size of this table.
Yeah.
That becomes very, very difficult to move around. So we ended up moving the cameras
Interesting.
on rigs, but that actually made it incredibly difficult for the animators because they had to imagine something moving when it was just the camera moving.
Yeah.
So not easy.
Yeah, I was going to say. So when you're there on set, what goes into that imagining? Is it a group effort, or is it?
Oh yeah, I mean it's a lot to do with the skill of the animator, and yes, a lot of thought goes into it, a lot of technical figuring out, but you also sorry, I completely got sidetracked.
I really hope that's not on the microphones. That's okay.
Can you ask that one again?
Yeah, just when it's a sequence like that where you're sort of having to imagining it, what it's like when it's done, but it's on the set. What's the process of that?
Well, there's a lot of technical thought goes into it, and obviously it's a lot to do with the skill of the animator. But the other thing as well that most people probably don't know is that we kind of rough through every shot first. So if it's a complex camera move, we will do camera tests, and then we will do, oftentimes if it's a complex shot, we will do a block, which is where you put, the puppet through very, very roughly what it's going to be doing in that shot. And then we do a rehearsal, so the animator actually does the shot twice. The rehearsal is fewer frames, it's on 2s instead of singles, but it gives you the chance to see the performance and see what's working and what's not, what might need moving in relation to camera, all that kind of thing. So you do get to work through a shot before you commit to it. I'm
interested in just speaking about it visually, the color palette of the entire thing, because you did Paranorman, which is I think like a much darker looking movie overall. What made you go with a much more brighter and sunnier and sort of outdoorsy look to this movie? I
think that was one of the things that appealed to me about doing this, was doing something very different for us. And Paranorman is darker because it takes place, like 90% of it takes place at night. Yeah. So I definitely wanted to do something that was bolder and brighter. I talk about it stepping out of the shadows, because I think stop motion often gets, people think of it as like the creepy animation.
That's fair.
And it is true. There's a rich history of creepy stop motion, but that's not all it can do. And I think this was me saying, look what else we can do. And because it's such a vibrant movie, we get to visit so many exotic locations. It was an excuse really to get to play with a color palette that we've never really explored before.
And I mentioned, day one, looking into the future. Now that it's done and you've seen it, I'm wondering what stop motion, all that effort, what do you think it brings that is different from anything else? Why would you say that doing it that way is worth the effort?
I think that it almost goes back to your childhood. When you play with toys and play with dolls and you imagine them coming to life, there is an element of that, this like primal feeling of seeing an inanimate object come to life, that stop motion talks to. There's a tactility to this medium it's real. I mean, when you think about it, stop motion is the closest to live action. It is real light on real objects. And that is very hard to mimic. I mean, CG does a great job, but there is something about the chaos, the imperfection of a real object, all these little fibers, and when you see that under real light on a set, there is something magical about it, and it makes you want to reach in and touch these things.
Amazing. Well, that's a perfect way to send us off. We'll let you get back to the con, but thank you so much for coming through.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Yeah.